All right, welcome everyone to this week's meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, before we get started tonight, I always like to go to some of the folks who are out there to talk about projects that they are working on. First up, Jeff Cohen, what's going on with that pod, dude?
Thanks there, Bruce. Yeah, I have a podcast called Baseball and BBQ. This week, we have the wonderful Kelsey Bird on. She has a podcast called Peace, Love, and Baseball. She's a big Cardinals fan, and if you have a chance, tune in because she was really terrific. That's Baseball and BBQ. Thanks, Bruce.
You can get that on any of the podcatchers that are out there. If you are subscribed to a podcatcher, just plug in Baseball and BBQ. It's funny. It's Peace, Love, and Baseball. Is that right, Jeff?
That's correct.
I have a very good friend of mine, and my nickname for her is Peace, Love, and Pumpkins. And she just looks at me and shakes her head and says, always with the pumpkins. I don't like pumpkin. Made me think of her. That's great. Ben's got his hand up. Let me go to Ben first. Go. You're muted, buddy. Now you're not.
And my volume's good because I checked it. Yeah, I should just drop a link to my podcast in the chat because I have a lot of 2024 baseball content for my podcast that is Vancouver Canadians high A content.
Yes, his pod is called the Golden V Podcast. You
Yes,
can also get that on any podcatcher out there. All you've got to do is search the name. And he will be, you can also just see it on our YouTube channel. I've linked to his pod as well as Baseball and BBQ. Now I want to talk to, just for a minute, Evan Katz. Hit that unmute button, would you please? I'm waiting. There he is.
Good to go here.
Evan Katz was my partner on a podcast over the summer. Evan, why don't you tell everybody what we've done?
Well, we did a podcast. I was a pitching coach in the Pecos League for the Roswell Invaders. That's the first stepping stone to independent baseball. For those that may not know that, Bruce was a gracious co-host. And we've got 12 episodes up. We've been nominated as a finalist for the best baseball podcast for the sports podcast group. And Bruce, thank you for sending out reminders to people to vote. But I think one of the most interesting things is you never know where these podcasts lead for these other podcasters out there. So Bruce and I did 12 episodes chronicling the 54-game Pecos League season. The Pecos League is in the central U.S. and it has a California division as well. Right now, I'm scouting for the North Platte 80s, which is a team in North Platte, Nebraska, named for Route 80, which goes through. It's a second-year team. And I'm trying to recruit players. And what has happened is I'm using the podcast as a recruiting tool. We interviewed players, we interviewed host families, we interviewed the manager from North Platte, Todd Everleth. I'm trying to let players know what kind of a manager Todd is. And I say, well, here, let me send you the link. Here's episode 5. You can hear Todd talking about his managerial style for the North Platte 80s. And then in episode 10, we interviewed the broadcaster for Pecos League TV, who broadcast the North Platte 80s games on the league TV channel, available internet only, of course. So it's just funny, you know, we've archived the 12 episodes, but the podcast lives on as a recruiting tool. So hopefully it'll bring some good players, Bruce, to North Platte for 2025.
We doing this in 25? We doing this again?
It's on the possible list. I got to get out there first.
Okay. I'm up for it. I'll do it. I'm up for it. Let's do it.
I'm good. I'm ready.
All right. I want to take a second to go to Bill Nolan. Bill put something in the chat that I'd like him to talk about. Bill, can you pop up for just a sec?
Yeah.
Bill, you have put something very interesting in the chat. Could you discuss that with us for a moment?
About the Seattle Mariners?
Yes, please.
It's one of many books that we have in the works. That particular one, we need a couple pinch hitters or pinch biographers because a couple people kind of fell through. And so we do need somebody to write the biography of Al Martin and another one of Coach Lee Elia. Neither of them would be due before June 30th, 2025. So there's all kinds of time. But if you're interested in writing a bio, there's a couple people, especially if you happen to be from Seattle and find that particularly interesting.
Could you drop your email in the chat so that people could see that and contact you directly, please?
Sure.
Ben's got his hand up again, and then we'll get started. Ben, go ahead.
I'm raising my hand to offer to help Bill. So I thought the best way, I dropped my name in the chat too, but I thought I'll just raise my hand because that's the proper way to do it.
So he's going to drop his email in the chat. Connect with Bill, and we'll get you in there. All right. On to our feature presentation. Here we go. As much as Major League Baseball has changed in the last century and a half, the transformations in the minors may be even greater. From independent competitors to farm systems, the minors have undergone a significant evolution. Tonight's presentation argues that the minor leagues reached their pinnacle in 1949. There were more teams and more leagues under the umbrella of organized baseball immediately after World War II than any time before or since. However, the minor league's place in the American mind quickly faded over the next decade. In describing both the rise and fall of minor league baseball, our presenter observes the reflection of a rapidly changing country in a rapidly changing world. Chuck Hildebrandt is a two-time winner of both the Doug Pappas Award for Best Oral Research Presentation and SABR Convention Poster Presentation Award. Chuck has authored 4 articles for the Baseball Research Journal and the National Pastime and founded the Baseball and Media Committee in 2013. A Detroit native who is a proud Tigers fan despite too many recent rebuilds, Chuck lives with his lovely wife, Terrie, in Chicago, apparently 3.6 miles from Wrigley Field, where he still plays in 2 rec softball leagues against the advice of his orthopedic surgeon, Chuck Hildebrandt. Welcome to Northern New England. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me. I'm pleased to bring a flat accent to this proceeding, and I'll do the best I can to keep you at least semi-entertained, and if not quasi-informed about how the minor leagues have evolved since the early days to today, but peaking, of course, in 1949. So shall I start? Go ahead and sharing?
You may go ahead. It's all yours.
Okie dokie. Do you all see this?
Perfect.
Okay. So for the purposes of this presentation, please imagine yourself in a chilly conference room in Minneapolis in August. Okay? Now, let's see. All right. Who knows who this guy is? I can't hear any of you, but I'm guessing some of you said Walter Austin, and that's right. It is Walter Austin, proven by what's probably his autograph right there. Now, who's this guy? I'm sure somebody said Ray Dandridge. It is Ray Dandridge. Why am I showing you these 2 guys? Because they are the only Hall of Famers who were in the minor leagues in the Twin Cities in 1949. In fact, Dandridge has the Minneapolis Millers mentioned right on his Hall of Fame plaque, which is kind of cool. So Austin led St. Paul to the American Association pennant that season, and Dandridge, in his first season in the so-called White Leagues, did nothing short of hitting .362 at the superannuated age of 35. Not bad for an old man, huh? Yeah, I wish I was that old again. So anyway, why does this matter? It matters because 1949 is kind of a special year in minor league history, one which heretofore hasn't seemed to get much attention. 1949 is the year in which there were more minor league teams playing in more minor leagues than any other year in history. 1949 was the peak of minor league baseball, which is why I have titled my presentation Peak Minors 1949. Now, as with anything else, there are reasons the minors evolved the way they did, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. What were the conditions that led to peak minors, and what conditions led to the decline? So to start with, let's take a top-line walk through the history of the minor leagues so we can have a solid understanding of how peak minors 1949 came to be. Now, the first real major league, the National League, launched in 1876. The following year, the first major minor league was the League Alliance. And I say major minor league because they were the first minor league to affiliate themselves with the National League, the Major League. Pardon me. As part of that affiliation, they recognized the superiority, the major status of the National League. And in exchange, the National League agreed to respect the alliance's contracts and not raid their rosters for players. And as more minor leagues formed, they all faced the same threat of seeing their players stolen from them or players jumping their own contracts. So to address this, the National League and the American Association, both major leagues, and the minor league Northwestern League signed what would become the National Agreement in 1883, firmly establishing each team's right to reserve their players, meaning not only would no players be stolen, but also contract jumpers would be blacklisted from all participating leagues. Big league teams also started lending certain of their players to minor league teams so they could fine-tune their skills during game competition. As such, minor league teams started to become dependent on big league clubs to supply them good players whenever the big clubs would deign to do so, at the risk of having them recalled at a moment's notice, in effect, creating the first farm team situations. So through the rest of the 19th century, major leagues and minor leagues came and went, but through it all, the National League maintained its supremacy, forcing the collapse of rival leagues and bestriding the baseball world like a colossus. Now, in 1901, the minor league American League started to behave like a major league. They didn't consider themselves bound by the then current national agreement, so they felt free to go after major and minor league players both on contract and on reserve. As the two leagues prepared for war, the minor leagues feared the effects on their rosters, so in response, they formed the National Association of Professional Baseball Leagues as their governing body, onto which 14 minor leagues co-signed. When the Major League War ended in 1903, a new national agreement was signed, under which the minors recognized the American and National Leagues as the two major leagues, and it required all leagues to recognize one another's contracts, meaning no poaching and no contract jumping. It also maintained the player draft that allowed big league teams to draft minor leaguers in return for a nominal fee, which is still around today as the Rule 5 draft. A new threat to the minors came in the form of the Minor League Federal League, which became an outlaw major league, meaning not part of the national agreement. So they did not respect rosters or reserve clauses. The Federals persuaded 221 major leaguers to jump to their league, despite the threat of blacklisting. The Federal League couldn't keep it up, though, and it dissolved after 1915, restoring the previous status quo relationship between the majors and the minors. The minors would face new devastation with the outbreak of World War I just before the 1917 baseball season. 21 leagues began that season, and only 11 of them finished. In 1918, just 10 leagues started the season, and only the International League could manage to finish it. The next 2 years were chaos. With no national agreement in place, the minors tried to force changes to limit the draft and increase compensation for drafted players. The majors themselves had a crisis of leadership, and the Black Sox scandal cast a pall over the entire sport. This led to the appointment of Commissioner Kennesaw Landis, who was an advocate of a clean game with strong minor league system. A new national agreement was signed for the 1921 season, allowing any minor league to exempt themselves from the draft, freeing teams to sell players for true market price. As top minor league teams started selling off players like Lefty Grove and Jack Bentley for top dollar, major league teams became frustrated with the new system. Cheap talent had been their lifeblood, and now they were getting squeezed. It took one man to see the landscape for the opportunity it was and remake the entire relationship between the majors and the minors. The GM of the St. Louis Cardinals, Branch Rickey. He came up with an audacious idea. Instead of paying top dollar for minor leaguers, what if we bought our own minor league teams, seeded them with young talent we sign, and basically raise our own big leaguers from the good earth ourselves? That's how the idea of a farm system truly took off. Rickey purchased a majority stake in his first minor league club in 1921, and by 1940, the Cardinals had 31 farm teams. Other front offices soon followed suit, and the shift to minor league teams as vassals rather than mere supplicants was in full swing. Bet you didn't think you needed a dictionary for this, did you? So the Great Depression took its toll on big league baseball, but surprisingly, the decade was much better than minor league baseball. It was a decade of growth and innovation, including the first night game in 1930 and the Shaughnessy playoffs in 1933, still the basis for playoff systems across all sports today. But perhaps the top reason the minors thrived was because the National Association implemented strict financial controls to keep fly-by-night operators out of the business of minor league baseball altogether. As a result, the minors grew from a low of 14 leagues in 1933 to 44 leagues in 1940. Yet another world war took its toll on the minors. In 1941 and 42 alone, 5 leagues disbanded and 27 others suspended operations. The number of leagues cratered to just 10 in 1943 and 1944, bumping up slightly to 12 by 1945. But once the war was over, the rush was on. The number of minor leagues leaped to 43 for the 1946 season, to 52 for 1947. Then 58 leagues launched on opening day of 1948, until finally we come to peak minor leagues 1949. And as you can see, I had just a little trouble figuring out how to fit all 59 leagues on this page. Now, to give you a sense of the scope of minor leagues in 1949, here's a map showing all the counties in the United States that had teams in organized baseball that year. And this doesn't even include 9 teams in Canada, 3 in Mexico, and 1 more in Havana, Cuba. This was how far and wide organized baseball had spread in 1949. Check out the concentrations of teams just in the Southeast, which later led Furman Bisher to write in the Atlanta Journal, there was one period after World War II where every town big enough to have a bank also had a professional baseball team, and the peak of excitement was reached when the bank was robbed or the baseball team won a pennant. Now, to be fair, it's not as though the scope of the minors in 1949 was so much greater than the years surrounding it. I mean, as we've seen, there were almost as many leagues and teams in 1948, and spoiler alert, in 1950 as well. I mean, I guess I could have called this presentation Peak Minors 1948 to 1950. I mean, that could have worked too, right? But 1949 was a turning point year, and technically it was the peak. So let's focus on that. What was it about this point in time that led entrepreneurs all across the country to conclude that, yes, owning a minor league baseball team is a good, sound business idea? Let's examine that. The first condition that had to exist was a relatively strong economy. After the Depression, the war industry supercharged the economy, ending the Depression and giving many American families the opportunity to make a lot of money and also save a lot of money, since consumer spending was sharply curtailed by demands that all available resources, including personal income, be directed to winning the war, not satisfying base consumer desires. This led to pent-up consumer demand, which had been building not just since the war, but since the beginning of the Depression itself. This resulted in full houses at not only minor league games, but also major league games. Having the money to spend and needing things to spend it on were also part of an overall post-war exuberance shared by both consumers and businesses, including baseball team owners. America had not just won the war, they came out of it arguably better off than before it started. Because America was physically separated from the rest of the warring world, there were practically no battles, no attacks, no bombings anywhere in the 48 states. So there was no rebuilding of cities or industries that needed to be done, as in Europe and in Asia. The 97% of servicemen who survived the war came back to America unscarred by destruction, and they were eager to enjoy its fruits once more, free of war and of economic depression. Americans felt a freedom they hadn't since the 1920s, or for some, perhaps ever, the freedom of spare time. Coupled with spare money, more Americans than ever were looking for things to do, not the work things they needed to do before, but the fun things they wanted to do now. And few things embodied good, clean American fun as much as going to a ball game, which is now affordable and available as never before. Overtaken by exuberance themselves, the big clubs were eager to ramp up the farm system arms race once more. The off-season of 1945-46 was replete with stories in the trades about teams vowing to rebuild their systems to pre-war levels and beyond. To give you a sense of how serious teams were about this, here are all 16 organizations from 1938 through 1948 with the war years gray in the middle. Just eyeballing it, you can see how the Braves, Giants, A's, and Phillies all hiked up their farm systems dramatically post-war versus pre-war. By 1948, there were more farm teams than at any other time, 265 of them. And all the franchises sported double-digit farm teams. Buoyed by these conditions, not only did the number of minor leagues and their teams soar, but so did attendance. Just shy of 40 million patrons spun through the minor league turnstiles, more than double that of major league ballparks. The average attendance per minor league team, as you can see in 1949, was about 88,500, a nudge above the 1948 average of 87.7, but also below the 1946 high of 103.5. So despite the high point in number of leagues, teams, and real number of attendance, you can see that the whiff of decline was starting to waft through the air. The decline got just a wee bit more palpable in 1950 because there were practically as many teams, but attendance per team dropped dramatically by 16.5%. The post-war shine was starting to wear off. And then, in 1951, the collapse started accelerating in earnest. What was causing this? Many baseball historians and authors point to television as the main reason the minors declined through the 50s. And it's true, television was a key reason. After all, instead of going somewhere and paying money to be entertained, people could just stay home and be entertained for free. I mean, after spending big money on a TV, of course. And not just TV in general, but baseball on TV. When the minors implemented their Rule 1D in an attempt to limit big league TV broadcasts from encroaching into minor league cities, it drew antitrust lawsuits. So after the 1951 season, the majors dropped the issue, and each club was allowed to decide for itself when, where, and how much they want to televise their games. This would affect minor league teams in and near cities airing games as part of a team's network. But one underappreciated factor in the minors' decline was the rise of network radio broadcasts of big league games. Unlike TV, which had limited reach due to so few TV stations with their small signal coverage, AM radio stations were plentiful with large signal areas, and networks like the Mutual system were easy and cheap to string together. In fact, Mutual aired a game of the day all through the early and mid-1950s in small towns across America. As you can see on this 1952 Mutual network affiliate map, exactly what I mean. This made the exciting, important, and superior big league games seem much more real than ever before to people who'd never seen, heard, or been to one, and it eroded interest in minor league ball maybe even more than TV did, which still had less than 50% household penetration in the early 50s. Another factor contributing to the decline of the minor leagues was its very structure itself. Although most original 16 teams had planned to regrow their farm systems beyond pre-war levels, it soon became clear that the expense of maintaining these systems was becoming too great. Teams chose to refocus their farm system efforts on player development instead of baseball world building. By 1963, no team had double-digit affiliates anymore. Many farm teams couldn't survive without a major league patron, and several teams closed up shop as a result. Yet another reason for the decline of the minors was major league relocation and expansion. In the mid-50s, the big leagues picked off 3 of the best minor league markets with franchise moves, first Milwaukee, then Baltimore, then Kansas City, to be replaced by the likes of Omaha, Nebraska, Richmond, Virginia, and Charleston, West Virginia. All of this was exacerbated by the seismic moves of the Giants and the Dodgers to the West Coast, as well as talk of the upstart Continental League, which spoiled the idea of minor league baseball for potential franchise cities like Atlanta, Toronto, Houston, Dallas, and of course, Minneapolis-St. Paul, in which we're sitting in a chilly conference room in August. In fact, the move of the Senators to the Twin Cities, followed by expansion to Houston, literally put the American Association out of business from 1963 through 1968. A few other causes have been cited for the decline of the minor leagues in the 50s and early 60s, including the collapse of urban cores, where most ballparks were located, due to the perception of crime there, coupled with the rise of suburbanization. Increased interest in leisure activities for an increasingly affluent American public, with luxuries such as car vacations becoming more attainable. Home-based activities such as cocktail parties and barbecues. Participatory sports such as bowling and golf. The so-called hobby boom, leading to interest in pursuits like construction kits and photography and DIY. And of course, the growth of spectator sports on TV, especially boxing and wrestling. There was also the rise of Little League Baseball, shifting focus from paying to see local professional teams with players from other states and countries to seeing free games of local children's teams with players you were related to, or maybe you live in there. Even the advent of home air conditioning has been cited. Increasingly affordable AC made it more practical to stay in your cool, comfortable home, doing your hobbies and watching Gorgeous George on TV, than to spend a hot evening at a fetid ballpark, especially in those Class C and D towns in the South. But regardless of what the exact causes were, and to what degrees they related to one another, what cannot be denied is just how fast and far the minor leagues did decline. From 1950, when there were still 58 leagues and 446 teams in organized baseball minor leagues, the numbers slipped dramatically every year until by 1963, when the new classification system went into place, the number of leagues had dropped to 17 and the number of teams had dipped to a record low 123, a decline of 72% in just 13 years. In the 6+ decades since 1963, the minors have undergone a slew of changes, including the creation of foreign rookie leagues to give young Latin American players a culturally friendly setting to play professionally and develop their skills. The stadium boom that has taken place across the minors, with the majority of stadiums now in use having been built in the 21st century. The explosion of independent leagues outside organized baseball, bringing professional baseball back to many small towns and providing hope to hundreds more players that they too might be able to make the big leagues after all. And just 3 years ago, the reduction of affiliated minor league teams by 25%, in which MLB picked the winners that stayed in organized ball, with the losers even moving to independent leagues, becoming college woodbat teams, or closing up shop entirely. This spurred yet another legal challenge to baseball's famous antitrust exemption just last year, which I explained more fully in the lower right-hand corner of my poster presentation, The Practical Effects of Baseball's Antitrust Exemption, which you can see in the Brown3 Waters Ballroom over that way anytime today or tomorrow, if your imagination is so strong that you think that you're in a chilly Minneapolis conference room in August. Otherwise, I can just email you a copy of the poster if you want to see it. How's that for a shameless plug, huh? Shameless enough for you? Okay, so the minor leagues has a long and interesting and occasionally fraught history going on almost a century and a half, and it's anyone's guess as to how it will evolve over the next few decades. But it's a pretty good bet that we will never see the likes of the massive scale that was peak minors 1949 ever again. And that's the presentation. Thank you very much.
So full disclosure, I just want everyone to know that I was in Minneapolis and I didn't think that the conference rooms were all that chilly. That's just
Thanks for your support there, Bruce. Appreciate it.
All right. If you have a question for our presenter, Chuck Hildebrandt, tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button. Once you hit that, you'll see another button that says raise hand. Hit the raise hand button and you will get in line to ask questions of our presenter, Chuck Hildebrandt, tonight. And we already see the hands going up. Ben Abel, you're up. Go.
It's not so much a question for Chuck about the past minor league system because he's covered it here. But as I mentioned to you, Bruce, I'd like to investigate Diamond Baseball Holdings, the company currently buying up the minor league teams across the US and some of the minor league teams in Canada at a pretty significant rate. I don't know if Chuck has an opinion on that.
Well, I have lots of opinions about capitalist consolidation anyway. I don't love the idea. Never loved the idea.
Mhm.
I would just love to see more people involved on it's probably a little too much to expect people to own baseball teams on a mom and pop basis, but
Right.
I would just love to be. That's kind of why I like independent leagues. I mean, quality of the baseball
Right.
notwithstanding, it can be very good, but I just like the idea that it's very grassroots,
Right.
very local, very, I guess, as close to a mom and pop situation as possible. And what do I think that means for the future of minor leagues? I think the future of minor leagues is already cooked in terms of organized baseball, because Major League Baseball has already determined what the future of the minor leagues is going to be. It's going to be a developmental process for major leagues only. They're going to try to streamline that down as much as possible. And I think what we're starting to see in the minors right now, and I think a lot of you have probably read the same things, but that the quality of the play has declined because
Right.
there are too many people now, too many players being rushed through the system. They're
Right.
not percolating through enough levels to develop properly, so that by the time they get to the high minors and to the majors, they have their skills fully developed. So I think there's a puncher's chance that the majors might open up another level on the minors, but it's going to be a question of money. That's really what it's going to come down to. Do they want the expense of that? So that's just my wild, off the cuff opinion of all that.
Thank you.
Chuck, you have the American Association, I think it's the Chicago Dogs that are out there
Yes.
near you. Have you ever been to one of those games? I was wondering if you could comment on the quality of play.
Quality of play is surprisingly good. I would say the quality of play. So I say surprisingly because I think people expect it to be lower than A ball, but it's definitely not. You have some ex-major leaguers there. You have some people who are maybe got spun out of the majors, and now they're just trying to work their way back, as well as, I mean, you're not going to see amateur men's. It's not an amateur men's league, that's for sure. I think I would place it more or less on the level of maybe double A. I mean,
They have a very professional presentation on their apps and their streaming service, which you can actually watch their games live across the nation for free. And I got into it a little bit last year. Time difference is a bit of a drag, but when you've got enough time to sit down and watch a game or two, it is actually, in my opinion, a lot of fun.
Yes.
And I know it's leagues expanded again. I think it's up to 14 teams now.
Yeah, I think it might be. Yeah, I think what the advantage of quality of play notwithstanding, I think maybe one of the advantages of a league like the American Association is that I think they might be freer to pursue a more exciting brand of ball. They don't have to constrain it to developmental objectives that major league parent companies or parent teams might have on them. And and so to your point, I think that you could argue that it is a lot more fun to watch than corporate minor leagues are.
Yeah, there's more of a mindset of winning.
Yeah, definitely. And entertaining.
And entertaining. Yep. I agree. Molly, you're up. Go.
First of all, Chuck, I just wanted to say thank you for coming and presenting to us tonight.
My pleasure,
And
thanks.
I just noticed we have the same thermos.
Yes. I got mine 10 years ago. I was way ahead of the curve.
Yes. That thing is indestructible in preschool. But back on topic. I was wondering what inspired you to do this research, and when doing the research, did you find like a certain team or a certain league that really, really piqued your interest and you did like extra work on it?
Actually, I think what drew me to this topic is I am a person who loves studying the structure of things. I like to know how things work, why things happen the way they do. I came across it might have been an article or a couple of articles or something that led me to, or that where I saw that there were way more minor leagues that came online after the war. And it just knocked me out that there were that many minor leagues with so many cities. I think one of the cities, I can't remember which one, but there was a city in the organized minors after World War II. The population of the city was less than 1,000 people. I mean, it just boggles my mind that could even happen. And so I really want to know, why did this happen? What were the conditions that led to this? And then why did it all decline? So that's really what led me to it. And I think, honestly, I think I did get a little bit of feedback from a couple of people who were a little disappointed that I didn't talk more about the great players of 1949, the great teams of 1949. But that was never what I was trying to do. I was trying to, give you like a 30,000 foot view of this is why the minor leagues evolved to being so many at that time, and this is why it declined. So that might be a little bit of a disappointing answer. I'm very sorry.
No, it isn't at
That's
all.
what led me to it.
It's totally your perspective,
Yeah.
and that's what I was interested in knowing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Francis Kinlaw, how you doing?
Pretty well.
You're
I
up.
Hey,
got-
Francis.
Actually, and Chuck, I remember our nice conversation in Chicago
Mhm.
2 years ago in front of your poster about long tenured players.
All right.
I enjoyed that. Sorry I couldn't make it to Minneapolis, but my question actually follows along with what you just commented about that small town in that had a team.
Mhm.
With the number of teams expanding so drastically in the 48, I guess you could say on,
Mhm.
were all these cities that had teams or developed teams, how did the ballparks get built? Were they constructed or were they already there? Or how did that work where so many cities had teams that had not had them previously?
Well, so I have just a very, very sparse amount of knowledge about this, but I do know that and Anthony Salazar actually had a really good presentation on how the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, built a whole bunch of ballparks to put men to work in the 1930s. So a lot of them got built during that period. And they were varying levels of quality, but I would imagine that whatever that city was of less than 1,000 that had a minor league team probably didn't have the greatest ballpark to play in. It might very well have been an open field with a chain link fence for all we know. But yeah, so a lot of them did get built during the 30s, and courtesy of the federal government trying to pull us out of the Depression.
Did they all have lights, or did they have to play in the daytime?
That's a good question. I can't say I know for sure. I would imagine that, well, I know minor leagues were on the cutting edge of lighting up their ballparks. Of the 448 teams in 1949, did all 448 have lights? Probably not. But I would imagine that I would imagine a healthy majority probably did. Maybe even a lot of the D parks did, because people just weren't always available to go see a ball game during the day. I mean, major leagues was a little bit of a different situation, but by the late 40s, when Tiger Stadium lit up in 1948, 15 of the 16 ballparks were lighted up anyway. So I couldn't imagine that very many minor league teams could have survived very long without having lights. And besides, the early games that were lit up, in the 30s, a lot of them were, and the Negro League teams as well, had transportable lights. They didn't necessarily have permanent lights at ballparks. They would rent, lights to come in the late games.
Yes, well, it was a wonderful presentation. I'm glad.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And based on your accent, you better be in Texas this June.
I might fit in down there.
No, I hope I see you down there, Francis. It's great talking to you.
Okay, I'm hoping to get there. Thank you.
If you would like to see Anthony Salazar's fantastic presentation on WPA ballparks, you can go to our YouTube channel, search Clyde Sukeforth chapter on YouTube, will come up, and his presentation is there. He was fantastic. He did a great job. Kevin Katz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. To
Go.
follow Chuck's comments, just to remind people that the Atlantic League, the American Association, the Pioneer League, and the Frontier League are all partner leagues. Although they're independent, Major League Baseball has a connection with them. So even though they don't own the teams, they're involved. And to tell you an interesting story, we're trying to recruit guys for the North Platte 80s right now. And it turns out the Pioneer League is experimenting with a bigger baseball this year.
When you
So
say
our
bigger,
manager
do you
is
mean
trying to-
Really?
bigger? Do you mean bigger in
Bigger-
size or
bigger
bigger in
size?
weight?
Our manager keeps saying to me, I hope that guy doesn't want to go to the Pioneer League. He's going to be surprised if he has a bigger baseball. So I think that the independent teams are independent to a certain extent, but it is an interesting structure. There's very few, fully independent teams. The Pecos League, most of the teams in the Pecos League are owned by the league. A couple of them are locally owned. And then, of course, you've got a few hub leagues. You mentioned United Shore. There's one in Portland, Oregon, the Mavericks League. And then, so there's a few independent leagues around. And also, speaking of old ballparks, Santa Fe in the Pecos League, that is a WPA structure that was built during the WPA.
Nice.
It's got a concrete grandstand around home plate.
So, Evan, since you work in independent baseball yourself, and you may or may not have a feel for this, do you have a feel for which of the independent leagues are the best quality, or could you rank them in terms of quality?
From what I was told, I did a story actually with the fellow who played in the Atlantic League, and he describes that as 4A, above AAA, but not quite Major League. I've looked at some of the rosters in the American Association, and I'd put that pretty close to being an equivalent talent level. And I think that was a good point that somebody made about you're not playing developmental baseball. So it really frees the organizations up a lot more to pursue the kinds of players that they want. And the Pioneer League has a cap of 2 years of professional experience. You can't play in the Pioneer League if you've been in professional baseball for 2 years. The Frontier League is a little more forgiving, I understand it.
Neat. Okay. Wow.
Evan, do you know anything about how much bigger the baseball is in the Pioneer League?
No, it's just this is it's not urban legend. This is an authoritative source. The manager of the North Platte 80s, he's heard that they're going to have a bigger baseball in the Pioneer League. Now maybe it's rumor, and maybe it was passed on to him, but this may be when they tell the story about bigger baseballs coming to Major League Baseball in 7 years, and maybe they'll say it started in the Pioneer League in 2025.
I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of people about the problem that baseball has of too many homers, too many strikeouts, right? And how do we get more balls in play? And one of the things that occurred to me was that the baseball might be too small or too light. So the baseball is essentially the same size it was since probably the 1880s when pitchers were 5'4" and 140 pounds. Now pitchers are, 6'6" and 260, but the ball's the same size. Same thing with the hitters. I had wondered whether making the baseball, if not bigger, then at least heavier, 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce. That might be too much all at once, but or how would you phase that in? Would you phase in, an 1/8 of an ounce every year for a few years so it gets up to a certain size? I don't even know, but could that help? Keep the ball more in the ballpark, because I think one of the reasons why we have so many strikeouts is so many players want to hit home runs, and it's so much easier to hit home runs than it used to be. It used to be you'd lay up on guys down the order and concentrate all your efforts and go max, throw max pitches to your, 2, 3, 4, 5 hitters, where you could lay up down the order. Now all 9 guys can take you out of the ballpark. So now you got to throw max effort in every single pitch. One of the reasons why pitchers' arms are falling off. So I just wonder if you have an opinion about that.
And I think Major League Baseball, I think it was a pretty knowledgeable group of people here. Major League Baseball is probably considering 10 different things to try to figure it out, and who knows what rises to the top. I mean, as long as they don't do the golden at bat, I can live with just about anything else.
Well, I would recommend
with you.
anybody, if you can find the study that MLB just did on pitcher injuries and the postulations they make as to what led to them. And I read it in ESPN maybe a couple of weeks ago. I would recommend anybody seek that out and read it. It's really, really interesting stuff, including the idea that changing the incentives for pitchers by requiring that they throw a minimum number of innings or fewer smaller pitching staffs might actually lead the incentives to pitchers not throwing max effort on every pitch because they have to like conserve energy through it. And it's just some really interesting stuff. I would recommend anybody seek it out and read it.
There was a fantastic article on that in The Athletic.
Mm-hmm.
It was fantastic. It was a huge feature story, and I think it was one of the better write-ups of that study. If you get to The Athletic, see if you can find that there.
Yeah,
Let's go to Mark Hoyle. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good.
Go.
So my question, take the team like the Cardinals that had that many minor league teams. What was the breakdown? AA, AAA, single A?
Yeah. Well, I know that I'm trying to think back to my research and so much of it I've forgotten, but they had a healthy spread among leagues, and they practiced a syndicate ownership situation where they owned several teams in the same league. I think I had actually read, and I couldn't find corroboration anywhere else, but that they owned every team in one entire league. And I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, or if that's apocryphal, but yeah, they had a pretty good spread across all the levels.
So would that lead to, other teams had it wasn't even, everybody had a different amount of teams. How many guys got buried that never saw the light of day that could have been a good ball player?
Right. No, exactly. The Rule 5 was meant to free those guys, but I obviously to your point, a lot of guys ended up playing in the minor leagues their entire careers and just never really got a shot. If they were lucky, maybe they played the Pacific League, which was sort of like a quasi major league and paid pretty well too. But yeah.
To comment on the Dogs, I went to one of the games when I was in Chicago, and I noticed the lineups on both teams, like everybody was hitting 300. It seemed like a hitter's league, and it was
very much so. Yes,
it was fun to watch because a lot of strikeouts. Guys are putting the ball in play.
Yeah.
That's all.
Anything else for our presenter, Chuck Hildebrandt, tonight? I think we have exhausted the crowd here. That's not easy to do, Chuck.
Well, I appreciate you having me here to make the presentation. Thanks very much for asking me.
Well, I appreciate you doing this for us. Now, we're back Monday, January 6th at 7 p.m. January 6th. It's already 2025. What happened? Oh, my gosh. John Burbridge is going to be here to give his Saber 52 presentation, the Northern League and the rebirth of independent baseball. This is going to be very, very interesting as well, so I don't want you to miss it. The sign-up link is included in the chapter meeting booklet and posted in Saber's events calendar at saber.org/events. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our uploads. And if you're not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, Saber boasts more than 35 different research communities, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to saber.org/join today. Chuck Hildebrandt, you are fantastic. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks again for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Well, let's get everybody out of here. We'll see everybody next week. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. And hey, go Lions.
Go Lions. All right. Have a great night, everyone.